In the entire history of American comic books, there have only been 3 ongoing series that have been named Tarzan. The first Tarzan #1 came out in 1948, and that series would be published by Dell Goldkey and eventually would be picked up by DC and would end in 1977. Later that year, in 1977, Marvel would put out its own Tarzan #1, and that series would last until 1979. And so after that, Tarzan is largely absent from comics in the 1980s, and then would come back with comics in the 1990s. And so that brings us up to July of 1996, when Dark Horse Comics would launch what is only the 3rd Tarzan series in comic book history, with their own Tarzan #1. And so what we're going to be looking at in this video is the first plot line in this series. It's called Tarzan's Jungle Fury. It's Tarzan 1 through 6. And we're going to be reviewing that. And then we're going to talk about the format of this series, which is kind of unique. And we're also going to talk about what is so darn exciting about an ongoing comic series. So the covers are by Arthur Sudam, who also did the covers for Tarzan: The Lost Adventure. And so these covers are not literally what happens in these issues. They're more kind of symbolic in nature, based on vague ideas about what is in the issue. And I got to tell you, this is absolutely beautiful, this cover for Tarzan #1. Tarzan versus this ape with a woman in tow, presumably Jane, but it's just so kinetic and so gorgeous. I love the foliage in the front here, the apes cheering them on in the back. It's just a very iconic image and just absolutely perfect for a Tarzan #1. I also think the cover for Tarzan #2 is also brilliant. So we have an ape caught in this web. We can see the skeletons down below, the jungle foliage, and Tarzan fighting this giant spider. And as a Conan fan, I already have some covers with giant spiders on them, but what really sticks out to me here is the color on this spider, because oftentimes spiders are colored very dark, and somehow making this spider very colorful actually makes it even creepier, and it's just a really strong cover. The cover for Tarzan #3 has Tarzan facing off against a horde of mutated animals, and this one's a little less effective to me. I like the pencils on this, but the animals are faded out, and that's not my favorite thing on a cover. And also, I think it's just kind of odd that we're staring at Tarzan's jungle buttocks. However, the cover for issue 4 is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, look at this image. This is something you could frame on your wall, kids. It's just beautifully colored, Tarzan taking down a dinosaur. And so this is the cover for issue 5, and to me this is a little bit too dark, which is a shame because I really like the line art here. I think everything but that super dark coloring really works on this cover. The cover for Tarzan #6 is nicely drawn, but just plain weird. This is probably representative of Tarzan fighting somebody from a lost civilization. However, the lost civilization in this storyline looks nothing like this, so it just comes off as being very strange. So let's talk about the talent putting this out. So probably the best known person on the interiors is Thomas Yates, who is doing the inks. He's a veteran comic artist who did Tarzan the Beckoning, and at this point was probably working on his adaptation of Return of Tarzan for Dark Horse. It's written by Bruce Jones, who also did Tarzan John Carter, and while I felt that story probably needed a little bit more cooking, this one is well done. And it's drawn by Christopher Schenck, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. With a name like that, I'm a little disappointed he didn't work on Wolverine comics. He's not a very well-known name in comics as far as I could tell. I only found like one issue of Aquaman he worked on in the early 90s. So he's not a big name, so you're just going to have to judge him by his art, but I think it's going to hold up pretty well. So the first issue begins with Jane waking up in the middle of the night and answering a knock at the door. And when Jane opens the door, this happens. And so she's bitten by this infected ape who has these bizarre vines that just burst out of his body. Tarzan and Mugambi burst in to defeat the mutated ape by working together in this really epic scene. Unfortunately, Jane has already been infected with the virus inside of the ape, which is called the Terra. And this is followed by an equally epic scene the next morning where Tarzan has to save one of his closest friends, Paul Darno, from a plane crash single-handedly. And so it becomes rather obvious that Jane is in a lot of trouble with this disease she's infected with. And so, of course, Tarzan insists that they leave immediately to go find the cure. Once in the jungle, they discover that the animals have been mutated by the Terra into monsters that Tarzan has to fight. And so this plotline focuses on both Tarzan and Paul Darno, as well as two new female characters, Kita, who is from a lost city and says that she can help cure Jane, and also a scientist named Dr. Eaton. And both of these women are kind of mysterious and are definitely more than meets the eye. And of course, by the end of the issue, we reach this awesome lost city. And of course, it's going to end on a cliffhanger, but I'm not going to spoil that for you guys. And so all of that is in Tarzan #1. And it perfectly defines this character. There are scenes where he's intense. There are scenes where he's compassionate. He's badass. He's all-knowing and all-present in the jungle. And by the time you get to the end of this issue, you know everything you need to know about Tarzan and everything you need to know about this plotline to make a decision whether you are in or out. There is no need to be like, well, maybe I need 2 or 3 issues to figure out what the series is like. No, this first issue perfectly orients both new and old readers, and this is how you do a first issue. And the rest of the plot line is also awesome. We have Tarzan fighting monsters. We got some really awesome dinosaurs up in here, and a variety of well-rendered normal jungle animals as well. And all of the action and the twists and turns and intrigue and epic Lost City battles that you would expect from a story like this. As a kid, I was only at that time probably reading like Tarzan of the Apes, so I wasn't that familiar with Burroughs' later novels, and I love this first plot line to death. As an adult who has read some of those later novels and is familiar with Burroughs' Lost City tropes and the stuff he did in the later Tarzan novels, I gotta say, this really, really captures that very, very well. And it was really cool to see a focus on Paul Darno, who oftentimes just doesn't even appear in Tarzan stories. And it's a kind of a shame that other supporting cast members aren't as utilized. Jane is on her deathbed for most of the plot line. She does get a couple very brief heroic moments in there, though. Mugambi was great to see at the beginning, but for some reason it just doesn't appear for the rest of the plot line without explanation. But he will have a major role to play in the next plot line. The Waziri are only mentioned in passing, and this is probably my only substantive critique of this plot line, because the Waziri, I mean, we can argue about how close they probably lived to Tarzan's bungalow, or if they should have been staying in the bungalow with Jane and Tarzan at night. So maybe, that ape could have gotten through there without the Waziri interfering. But the second Jane gets infected and Tarzan has to leave her, the Waziri should have been there. They should have been there tending the chain and guarding the bungalow, just like in the novels. Instead, for some mystifying reason, they have a tribe of apes do that. Of course, Tarzan can talk to apes, but in the novels, the apes have a very short attention span, and so they would probably just lose interest and abandon Jane at some point. So in the novels, they would be a very poor choice for that, but that's really my only criticism of this plot line. Otherwise, I think it's excellent. And so the series does feature the ape language letter column in the back. And while I'm at it, let me talk about a scene that really bothered some of the letter writers. So there's a scene where Dr. Eaton kisses Tarzan in the first issue. Now, it's obvious he did not solicit this. He politely brushes her off afterwards, and it's very obvious he is not interested in her at all. His motivation in this plot line is his obsession with saving his own wife. However, there was a letter writer who was so upset by this that he told Dark Horse to never send him another preview of a Dark Horse comic ever again. And there was another letter writer who said that it made Tarzan into a brash makeout dude, which I'm not even sure what that means. And so anyway, I would definitely recommend this plot line. And Dark Horse actually did include this in a Tarzan omnibus it put out, which is available on Comixology. And so to talk about the format of the title, it is a series of self-contained miniseries within a series. And so what I mean by that is that they are numbered plot lines that are self-contained and each have different creative lineups. So this is done by a different creative lineup than the next plot line, though we will be keeping the artist, which is awesome. The best known use of this format that I can think of is Legends of the Dark Knight back in the 90s. And so each of these plot lines was done by a different creative team. They were all self-contained, but they were all drawn together by the fact that they were set during the first year of Batman's career. This series actually has the opposite setting. This is actually well into the Ape-Man's career after the final Burroughs novel in the late 1940s. And so that's going to be the setting for all of the plot lines with the exception of one that'll happen a little bit later in this series. And so why is an ongoing series an exciting thing? It's because it's the promise of having new stories with a character every month, right? It's a chance to thoroughly explore a character and their world. And it's a statement of intent from a publisher, right? We believe in this character and we believe in you, the reader, that you are going to support this character and we are going to be able to give you monthly stories with this character for as long as you're willing to buy them. Now, sadly, that was a short-lived promise for this particular series, but we will be reviewing all the plot lines here. And so join me next time as we take a look at probably what's my favorite plot line in the Dark Horse run, Tarzan, Legion of Hate. Like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, see ya.